The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jason pushed his mop cart down the gleaming marble floors of Apex Industries. It was 3 in the morning, and the towering glass building stood silent except for the rhythmic squeak of his cart wheels. He wore the same navy blue janitor uniform he'd worn for the past 6 months, his name badge slightly crooked on his chest. To everyone who worked here, he was nobody, just another face in the background, cleaning up after people who never bothered to learn his name. During the day, when the office buzzed with activity, Jason moved like a ghost through the corridors. Executives in expensive suits brushed past him without a glance. Junior employees barely registered his presence as they hurried to meetings, coffee cups in hand. He was furniture to them, part of the building's infrastructure, as invisible as the air conditioning vents or the security cameras mounted in the corners. Marcus Webb, the company's chief operations officer, was the worst of them all. A man in his early 40s with slick-back hair and a perpetual smake, Marcus treated the cleaning staff like they were beneath contempt. Just last week, Jason had been mopping the executive floor when Marcus walked through, deliberately stepping in the wet area he'd just cleaned. The expensive Italian shoe left a muddy print across the pristine surface. "Missed a spot?" Marcus had said with a laugh, not bothering to look back as his colleagues joined in the mockery. They'd walked away, leaving Jason to clean the mess again, their laughter echoing down the hallway like poison in his ears. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. The disrespect had become routine, expected, almost boring in its predictability. But what none of them knew, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that Jason wasn't really a janitor at all. 6 months ago, the board of directors had approached him with an unusual request. Apex Industries was hemorrhaging money, plagued by corruption and incompetence at every level. Projects failed, clients disappeared, and money vanished into mysterious accounts. The board suspected internal sabotage but couldn't identify the source. They needed someone on the inside, someone who could observe without being noticed, someone who could see the truth hidden behind closed doors and fake smiles. Jason Statham wasn't just anyone. Before this assignment, he'd built 3 companies from nothing and sold them for hundreds of millions. He was a legend in business circles, known for his ruthless efficiency and his ability to diagnose problems that others couldn't see. He'd turned failing corporations into industry leaders, fired corrupt executives without hesitation, and rebuilt broken systems with surgical precision. The board had given him carte blanche to investigate, observe, and prepare a complete restructuring plan. In 6 months, he would assume his real position as a new chief executive officer. So Jason had traded his tailored suits for a janitor's uniform. He'd learned to empty trash bins and scrub toilets. He'd mastered the art of being invisible, of listening without being heard, of watching without being seen. And what he'd discovered in those 6 months had shocked even him. The corruption ran deeper than anyone suspected. Marcus Webb wasn't just incompetent. He was actively stealing from the company, approving fake contracts and funneling money to shell corporations. 3 other senior executives were involved, creating an elaborate scheme that had cost Apex nearly $20 million. Jason had documented everything. He had emails, recordings, financial records, and witness statements. His small janitor's closet on the 5th floor had become his secret office, filled with evidence that would destroy careers and possibly lead to criminal charges. Tomorrow morning, everything would change. Tomorrow, the invisible man would step into the light, and the people who'd mocked him would learn a lesson they'd never forget. As Jason finished mopping the executive floor one last time, he allowed himself the smallest smile. Justice, he'd learned long ago, was always sweeter when it came as a surprise. The security guard at the front desk nodded at Jason as he wheeled his cart toward the service elevator. It was Thursday night, technically Friday morning at 1:15, and Jason had exactly 10 hours before the emergency board meeting that would change everything. He pressed a button for the executive floor, watching the numbers climb as the elevator rose through the building's 40 stories. His reflection stared back at him from the polished steel doors, a man in a simple uniform that disguised everything he really was. When the doors opened, Jason stepped into darkness. The executive floor was always empty at this hour, a sprawling space of glass-walled offices and expensive furniture that sat unused for more hours than it was occupied. He flipped on the lights and began his routine, but tonight his mind was elsewhere, replaying the moments that had led to this point, remembering every humiliation and every discovery. 2 months ago, he'd been cleaning Marcus Webb's office when he'd noticed a USB drive partially hidden under a stack of papers. Professional curiosity had made him plug it into the computer, and what he'd found there had been the breakthrough he needed. Contract with companies that didn't exist. Wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Email chains discussing profit sharing and creative accounting. Marcus had been sloppy, arrogant enough to believe that a janitor couldn't possibly understand what he was looking at. Jason had copied everything, returned the drive to its exact position, and continued mopping as if nothing had happened. That night in his janitor's closet, he traced the money through a maze of shell corporations and dummy accounts. The scheme was sophisticated but not invisible, not to someone who knew what to look for. Marcus and his accomplices had stolen systematically for 3 years, small enough amounts that no single transaction raised flags, large enough that the cumulative damage was catastrophic. But the financial crimes were only part of the story. Jason had also witnessed the toxic culture that Marcus had created. He'd seen talented employees quit after being screamed at in meetings. He'd watched as Marcus took credit for other people's work, presenting their ideas as his own to the board. He'd observed how fear and intimidation had replaced innovation and collaboration, how the best people left while the worst ones thrived by learning to kiss up and kick down. Just last month, Jason had been cleaning the conference room after a late meeting when he'd heard crying from one of the nearby offices. He'd found Sarah Chen, a junior analyst, sitting at her desk with her head in her hands. She'd looked up, startled and embarrassed to be seen in such a vulnerable moment, but something about Jason's kind eyes had made her talk. Marcus had humiliated her in front of the entire department, calling her stupid and incompetent because a report had a minor formatting error. It was the 3rd time that week he'd targeted her. "I can't do this anymore," she'd whispered. "I worked so hard to get here, and now I dread coming to work. He makes me feel worthless." Jason had wanted to tell her everything right then, to promise that things would change, but he couldn't risk compromising the investigation. Instead, he'd simply said, "Don't quit. Not yet. Sometimes things change when you least expect it. Give it 1 more week." She'd looked at him strangely, perhaps surprised that the janitor was offering advice, but she'd nodded. 1 more week, she'd agreed. Now, as Jason moved through the executive floor, he thought about Sarah and all the others like her. The good people who'd been beaten down, who'd started to believe that this toxic environment was normal, that they deserved the abuse. Tomorrow, they'd learn that someone had been watching, that someone had cared enough to do something about it. Jason entered Marcus's office and looked around at the expensive artwork, the mahogany desk, the leather chairs that cost more than most people earned in a month. Behind that desk, Marcus had built his little kingdom of cruelty and corruption. Tomorrow, that kingdom would fall. Jason pulled out his phone and took one final photograph of the office, wanting to remember this moment, this last night of invisibility before everything changed. The picture showed an empty desk, a dark office, a space waiting for its reckoning. He sent a photo to his secure cloud storage, where it joined hundreds of other pieces of evidence, a complete record of everything he'd witnessed and discovered. At 6 a.m, Jason finished his shift and clocked out for the last time as a janitor. He drove to his apartment, showered, and put on one of his tailored suits, the fabric feeling strange after 6 months of wearing uniforms. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. The experience had changed him in ways he was still processing. He'd learned what it felt like to be invisible, to be treated as less than human, to watch injustice unfold with no immediate power to stop it. Those lessons would stay with him forever. At 10:30, Jason walked back into Apex Industries through the front entrance. The security guard did a double-take, confusion crossing his face as he tried to reconcile the janitor he'd seen leave 4 hours ago with the executive now standing before him. Jason smiled and headed for the elevators. The emergency board meeting started at 11. By noon, everything would be different. The boardroom occupied the entire top floor of Apex Industries, a cathedral of glass and steel with panoramic views of the city stretching in every direction. 12 leather chairs surrounded the massive conference table, each one occupied by a member of the board of directors. At the head of the table sat Margaret Chen, the 72-year-old chairwoman who'd founded the company 4 decades ago and still held the largest share of voting stock. She was a legendary figure in the industry, known for her sharp mind and her absolute intolerance for dishonesty. Marcus Webb sat 3 chairs down from Margaret, relaxed and confident. He'd been summoned to this emergency meeting along with his 3 closest allies among the senior executives. The notice had been vague, mentioning only organizational restructuring and new leadership initiatives. Marcus assumed it was another tedious strategy session, perhaps a discussion about quarterly targets or market expansion. He checked his watch impatiently, wondering how long this would take. The doors opened at exactly 11 o'clock, and every head turned to see who was entering. Marcus glanced up casually, then froze, his brain unable to process what his eyes were showing him. The janitor walked into the boardroom. The same man who'd mopped these floors last night, who'd emptied the trash bins and cleaned the bathrooms, who'd been invisible and irrelevant, now wore a charcoal suit that probably cost $10,000. He moved with quiet confidence, carrying a leather briefcase, his entire bearing transformed from submissive to commanding. "What is this?" Marcus sputtered, looking around the table in confusion. "Why is the cleaning staff in here? This is a private board meeting." Margaret Chen's expression remained neutral, but her eyes gleamed with something that might have been satisfaction. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce Jason Statham, your new Chief Executive Officer. He's been with us for 6 months, though perhaps not in the capacity you imagined." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Marcus's face cycled through expressions, confusion giving way to comprehension, comprehension giving way to fear. Around the table, the other executives sat frozen, their minds racing through months of careless words and actions, suddenly seeing them all in a terrible new light. Jason set his briefcase on the table and opened it, removing a thick folder. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured, but it carried an edge that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "For the past 6 months, I've had the unique opportunity to observe this company from a perspective that few executives ever experience. I've seen how you treat people when you think no one important is watching. I've documented how you conduct business when you believe there are no consequences. And I've uncovered financial crimes that have cost this company nearly $20 million. He opened the folder and began distributing copies of documents around the table. Financial records, email printouts, photographs, transcripts. Each board member received a complete set, their expressions growing darker as they flipped through the pages. Marcus tried to stand, but Margaret raised one hand, and he sank back into his chair as if she'd physically pushed him. "You can't do this," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its usual arrogance. "Whatever you think you found, I can explain. This is entrapment. I'll sue. I'll have your license revoked." Jason finally looked directly at Marcus, and the man flinched from the intensity in his eyes. "Please, continue talking. Everything you say is being recorded for potential legal proceedings. Your attorneys will need to work very hard to explain these documents." He pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the table to Marcus. "This is a wire transfer authorization bearing your signature. It sent $200,000 to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. The corporation's sole shareholder is your brother-in-law. Would you like to explain the business purpose of that transaction?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. The other 3 executives looked at each other, silent communications passing between them as they calculated their options and found them all terrible. One of them, David Park, the chief financial officer, suddenly pushed his chair back and stood. "I want to cooperate," David said quickly. "I'll tell you everything. It was Marcus's idea from the beginning. He brought me in, said it was safe, said no one would ever know. I kept detailed records. I can prove that he orchestrated the whole thing." "Sit down, David," Marcus hissed. "Don't say another word." But the dam had broken. David remained standing, his words tumbling out in a rush. "He threatened me, said if I didn't help him, he'd destroy my career. I have emails. I have recordings. I'll give you everything." Jason watched the spectacle with clinical detachment. This was always how it ended when conspiracies unraveled. The moment consequences became real, loyalty evaporated, and the rats started fighting each other to be first off the sinking ship. He'd seen it before, and it never stopped being pathetic. Margaret Chen's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Gentlemen, you're all fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your personal belongings will be sent to you. Your access cards and company devices must be surrendered now. You will not speak to any other employees. You will not return to this building. Our legal team will be in touch regarding criminal referrals to the appropriate authorities. As if on cue, the doors opened and 4 security guards entered. Marcus tried one last act of defiance, standing and pointing at Jason. You think you're so clever? You think you're some kind of hero? You lied to everyone. You deceived us all. You're just as bad as you think I am. Jason stepped closer to Marcus, close enough that only the other man could hear his quiet words. The difference between us is simple. I lied to catch criminals. You lied to steal from people who trusted you. I observed from a position of humility. You abused from a position of power. And now you have plenty of time to think about that difference. He stepped back and nodded to the security guards. Please escort these gentlemen out. As Marcus and the others were led from the room, Jason turned to face the board of directors. His real work was just beginning. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jason's new office, the same office that Marcus Webb had occupied just hours ago. The expensive artwork was already being removed, the ostentatious decorations boxed up and taken away. Jason had ordered the space to be stripped down to its essentials, new furniture brought in that was comfortable but not extravagant. He wanted an office that invited collaboration, not one that intimidated visitors and announced the occupant's superiority. At 2 o'clock, he sent out a company-wide email announcing an all-hands meeting in the main auditorium at 4. The building hummed with rumors and speculation. Everyone had seen the executives being escorted out by security. Everyone had heard fragments of stories, pieces of gossip, but no one had a complete picture. The uncertainty was palpable, and Jason knew that fear could be as toxic as a corruption he'd just eliminated. People needed to understand what had happened, and, more importantly, what would happen next. The auditorium seated 400 people, and every seat was filled when Jason walked onto the stage. He'd changed into a simpler suit, still professional but less intimidating than the power outfit he'd worn to the board meeting. He wanted to look like someone they could approach, someone they could trust. The crowd fell silent as he stepped up to the microphone, hundreds of faces staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension to recognition slowly dawning. My name is Jason Statham, he began. Some of you already know that. Others are probably trying to figure out why the janitor is standing on this stage. A ripple of murmurs spread through the auditorium. For the past 6 months, I've been working undercover as a member of the cleaning staff. This was not a publicity stunt or a television show. It was a serious investigation into serious problems that threaten the future of this company and the livelihoods of everyone in this room. He clicked a button, and the screen behind him lit up with a simple slide showing Apex Industries' financial performance over the past 3 years. The downward trend was unmistakable, a company in slow motion collapse. We've been losing ground steadily. Clients have left. Projects have failed. Our best people have quit. The board of directors needed to understand why, and they asked me to find out. What I discovered was systematic theft, deliberate sabotage, and a culture of fear and intimidation that poisoned everything good about this organization. Sarah Chen sat in the 3rd row, her eyes wide with recognition and dawning understanding. Around her, other employees were having similar realizations, remembering encounters with a quiet janitor, offhand conversations, small moments of kindness that now made sense in a completely different context. Today, 4 senior executives were terminated and escorted from the building, Jason continued. They will likely face criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud, but the financial crimes, as serious as they are, were only symptoms of a deeper problem. This company had lost its way. We created an environment where bullies thrived and good people suffered, where innovation was punished and conformity was rewarded, where your value was determined by your ability to flatter the right people rather than by the quality of your work. He paused, letting the words sink in. That changes today. Not tomorrow, not gradually, but right now. I'm making several announcements that are effective immediately. Another slide appeared, this time showing a list of policy changes. First, we're implementing a zero-tolerance policy for workplace harassment and intimidation. Not a policy with loopholes or exceptions, but absolute zero tolerance. If you abuse your power, you're gone. If you create a hostile environment, you're gone. I don't care how much money you make for this company or how senior your position is. Basic human decency is not negotiable. The auditorium erupted in applause, tentative at first, then building to something stronger. Jason waited for it to subside before continuing. Second, we're creating new channels for feedback and complaints that bypass the traditional hierarchy. Too often, problems go unreported because people fear retaliation from their immediate supervisors. That fear is rational, but it can't continue. You will be able to report concerns directly to independent investigators who answer only to me and the board. More applause, more energy in the room. People were sitting forward in their seats now, engaged instead of defensive. Third, we're conducting a comprehensive compensation review. I've seen your work over the past 6 months, and I know many of you are underpaid relative to your contributions. That will be corrected. Within 30 days, you will receive notification of any adjustments to your salary. No one will be reduced, but many of you will see significant increases. The applause was louder now, mixed with surprised conversations and excited whispers. Jason raised his hand for quiet. But I need to be honest with you about the challenges ahead. We've lost nearly $20 million to theft and mismanagement. Our reputation in the industry has been damaged. Several of our largest clients are considering leaving. We have 6 months, maybe a year, to turn this ship around, or we won't survive. I can't promise that everyone will keep their jobs. I can't guarantee success. What I can promise is transparency, fairness, and the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. He clicked to a new slide showing an organizational chart with several positions marked as vacant. We need to rebuild our leadership team, and I want to do that by promoting from within wherever possible. I've watched many of you work over the past 6 months. I've seen your talent, your dedication, and your integrity. Some of you will be contacted in the next week about new opportunities. This company's future will be built by people who were loyal during the difficult times, not by outsiders who show up after problems are solved. Sarah Chen felt her phone buzz and glanced down to see an email notification. The subject line read, Leadership Opportunity, Confidential. Her hand shook slightly as she looked back up at the stage. Finally, Jason said, I want to apologize. I spent 6 months watching some of you suffer through situations that were unacceptable. I saw the damage that toxic leadership inflicted, and I couldn't stop it immediately because I needed to build an airtight case against the people responsible. Some of you were hurt during that time, and for that, I'm sorry. The investigation was necessary, but I recognize that the cost was real. He stepped back from the microphone, then forward again, as if deciding whether to say something more. When I agreed to take this position, I thought I understood what it meant to build a great company. I'd done it before, several times. But spending 6 months as your janitor taught me something I'd never fully understood. A company isn't great because of its executives or its strategy or its quarterly earnings. A company is great when the person scrubbing the floors is treated with the same respect as the person in the corner office. When success is measured not just in profit margins, but in whether people are proud to work here. When power is seen as a responsibility to serve others, not a license to exploit them. The auditorium had gone completely silent. I promise you this. I will work every day to build that kind of company. I will make mistakes, and I'll need your help to correct them. But I will never stop fighting to make Apex Industries a place where talent matters more than politics, where integrity is valued more than obedience, and where every person is treated with dignity. Thank you for listening. As Jason left the stage, the applause followed him, a sound like thunder echoing through the building. The rebuilding had begun. The spring morning was bright and warm as Jason stood at his office window, looking down at the city below. 6 months had passed since the day he'd walked out of that auditorium to begin the real work of transformation. 6 months that felt like 6 years, packed with challenges and triumphs, setbacks and breakthroughs, moments of doubt and moments of profound satisfaction. The numbers told part of the story. Apex Industries had recovered faster than anyone expected. 3 major clients who had been on the verge of leaving had renewed their contracts after meeting with a new leadership team. 2 significant new contracts had been signed, bringing in revenue streams that would stabilize the company's finances. The stock price had climbed steadily, restoring investor confidence and validating the board's faith in Jason's approach. But the numbers weren't what mattered most to him. What mattered were the people, the culture, the intangible transformation that happened when fear was replaced by trust and cynicism was replaced by purpose. He could feel it walking through the hallways, see it in the way employees interacted with each other, hear it in the energy level during meetings. Apex was becoming what it should have been all along. Sarah Chen was now the director of analytics, leading a team of 12 people. She'd been Jason's first promotion, and she'd exceeded every expectation, bringing fresh ideas and infectious enthusiasm to her new role. Last week, she'd stopped by his office to thank him for believing in her when she'd been ready to quit. "You knew," she'd said. "That night you found me crying, you knew everything that was happening. How did you not just tell me?" "Because if I'd told you, I would have had to tell everyone," Jason had replied. "And the people who were stealing from us would have destroyed evidence and disappeared. Sometimes you have to let people suffer a little longer to make sure justice is permanent." She'd nodded slowly. "I understand. But I also understand now why you looked so sad that night. It must have been terrible, watching all of it and having to stay silent." She was right. It had been terrible. There were nights during those 6 months when Jason had questioned whether the investigation was worth the human cost, whether he should have found a faster way to expose the corruption. But he'd seen too many cases where premature action had allowed the guilty to escape, where incomplete evidence had meant inadequate consequences. He'd forced himself to wait, to watch, to endure the invisibility and the disrespect because he knew that thoroughness was the only path to real accountability. The criminal cases against Marcus Webb and his accomplices were proceeding through the courts. David Park, the CFO who had cooperated, had pleaded guilty and received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. Marcus was fighting the charges, maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence, but his lawyers had privately advised Jason's attorneys that they expected him to eventually accept a plea deal. The stolen money was being recovered through asset seizures and civil judgments, a slow process but one that would eventually make the company whole. More importantly, the culture had changed in ways that went beyond policy documents and org charts. Meetings were different now, characterized by honest debate rather than fearful agreement. Employees spoke up when they saw problems instead of staying silent. The executive team Jason had built understood that their job was to serve the people they managed, not the other way around. Power flowed down through the organization as empowerment rather than up through it as tribute. Jason had instituted a practice of spending one morning each week working alongside employees in different departments. He'd helped the IT team troubleshoot network issues, sat with customer service representatives as they handled difficult calls, and spent time in the mailroom learning the logistics of how information flowed through the company. Some executives thought it was a waste of the CEO's time, but Jason knew better. Those mornings kept him grounded, kept him connected to the real work that happened beyond the executive floor, kept him from becoming the kind of leader he'd spent 6 months investigating. The janitor who'd replaced him, a young man named Miguel, had become something of a celebrity in the building. Everyone knew the story now, and they treated Miguel with a respect that bordered on reverence, as if afraid that he too might secretly be someone important. Jason had spoken with Miguel several times, ensuring he understood that the respect should be genuine, not performative, that every person who worked at Apex deserved to be treated with dignity regardless of their position. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Margaret Chen entered, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd lived many years but refused to let age slow her down. She settled into one of the chairs across from Jason's desk and studied him with eyes that missed nothing. "The board met this morning," she said without preamble. "We reviewed the quarterly results, the client satisfaction surveys, the employee engagement scores, and the various other metrics we use to evaluate performance. The consensus was unanimous. You've exceeded expectations in every measurable category." "Thank you," Jason said. "But you didn't come here just to tell me that. You could have sent an email." Margaret smiled, a rare expression that made her look decades younger. "I came to tell you something more important. I've been involved with this company for 40 years. I've seen it grow from 10 employees in a converted warehouse to thousands of people across multiple continents. I've hired and fired more executives than I can remember. And in all that time, I've never seen a transformation like the one you've accomplished in 6 months." She leaned forward, her voice taking on an intensity that commanded attention. "But what impresses me most isn't the financial recovery or the operational improvements, as significant as those are. What impresses me is that you were willing to spend 6 months as a janitor. Most executives in your position would have marched in here on day one, fired everyone they suspected of wrongdoing, and declared victory. You took the harder path. You humbled yourself. You experienced what it's like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be treated as if you don't matter. And that experience made you a better leader than you were before. Jason felt something tighten in his chest. I'm not sure I agree with that assessment. A better leader would have found a way to end the suffering sooner. No, Margaret said firmly. A better leader understands that real change requires real understanding. You could have fixed the symptoms without ever addressing the disease. Instead, you diagnosed the root cause and rebuilt from the foundation up. The people in this building don't just respect you as their CEO. They trust you because they know you've seen the company from every angle, including the angles that most leaders never bother to examine. She stood, preparing to leave, then paused. I'm retiring at the end of the year. The board will need to elect a new chairman. I'm recommending you for the position. Think about it. After she left, Jason sat in silence, processing her words. Chairman of the board would mean even more responsibility, even more pressure, even more decisions that would affect hundreds or thousands of lives. It would mean less time for the hands-on work he enjoyed, more time in meetings and strategic planning sessions. Part of him wanted to refuse, to stay in the role where he could remain connected to the day-to-day reality of the company. But another part of him, the part that had agreed to spend 6 months as a janitor, understood that leadership meant going wherever you could do the most good, even when it was uncomfortable. Especially when it was uncomfortable. His phone buzzed with a text message from Miguel, the janitor. Mr. Statham, there's something wrong with the heating system on the 5th floor. People are freezing. Can you help? Jason smiled and typed back, On my way. He grabbed his suit jacket and headed for the elevator, already running through possibilities in his mind. As CEO, he could have delegated this to facilities management. As someone who'd spent 6 months learning how the building actually worked, he knew he could probably fix it faster himself. The elevator doors closed, and Jason caught his reflection in the polished steel. 6 months ago, he'd looked at this same reflection and seen a man disguised as a janitor. Now he saw something different, something more complete. A leader who understood that every person in the building mattered, not as theory but as lived experience. A CEO who would never forget what it felt like to be invisible. The doors opened on the 5th floor, where employees were gathered in the hallway wearing their coats, their breath visible in the cold air. They looked up as Jason approached, and several of them smiled with genuine warmth. Not the false warmth of people trying to impress the boss, but the real warmth of people who trusted that he would actually help. Let's figure this out together, Jason said, rolling up his sleeves. And as he worked alongside them to diagnose the problem, he realized that Margaret Chen had been right. The 6 months as a janitor hadn't just been an investigation. It had been a transformation, one that had changed him in ways that would shape every decision he made for the rest of his career. He'd gone in searching for criminals and come out understanding what it meant to truly lead. The heating system sputtered back to life, warm air beginning to flow through the vents. The employees cheered, and someone clapped Jason on the shoulder with easy familiarity. As he rode the elevator back to the executive floor, his phone already filling with new messages and demands, Jason felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not satisfaction or pride or accomplishment, though he felt those too. What he felt was purpose, the bone-deep certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The invisible man had stepped into the light, and in doing so, he'd illuminated a path for everyone else to follow.